Awesome. Okay, so thank you. Yeah, 12 years, 10 years. I think it's about 10 years actually, but that's okay. Um, Several certifications and lots of trailhead badges. I'm a big fan of trailhead because it's really helpful to brush up on those new areas and things that you're interested in. There is over 2,000 badges now. I think there's about 2,500. And if you're an employee of Salesforce, there's a whole bunch more of internal ones as well. So there is plenty there for everybody. There's two areas in particular that I'm really interested in Salesforce, and one is around flow, and the second one is around user interface design. So today we're just going to share some best practices around flow. I'm based in Queensland, Australia, and this is the second time that I've been presenting for your user group. I did one only just a few weeks back. But I'm based in Bundaberg, just north of Brisbane, and this is where we make the famous Bundaberg rum. So if anybody's been to Australia and has been in a hotel and had a Bundy and Coke, this is where they make it right here in Bundaberg. So we grow a lot of sugar cane, and a byproduct of that is made into rum. Okay, so we're going to look at flow best practices. And look, there's only 4 slides, so I'm keeping it pretty simple. There's some do's and some don'ts. So we'll start with the don'ts because they're fairly straightforward. Number one is don't use flow for everything. Right? And it also implies that if you're an Apex developer, don't use Apex for everything either. Okay, so flow's not the answer for every automation. If you think of a tradesman like a carpenter has a number of tools in their toolbox. They've got hammers and screwdrivers and nail guns and drills and things like that. And if they need to join two pieces of timber together, there's a number of different ways that they could do it. They could use a hammer and nails, or they could use a nail gun, or they could use screws. It's really a matter of depending upon the customer requirements. If the customer requires the carpenter to make some furniture, then it may well be that a hammer and nails or a nail gun or even a screw is not the answer, and that they need a mortise and tenon joint, so a special timber join to join that timber. Okay, so the message there is just because you can doesn't mean you should. Flow's not the answer for every automation. So that's number one. Number two is don't use a mix of Apex triggers, record triggered flows, and Process Builder. Okay. Process Builder has been retired now, so we can't create new process builders, but an organization that you're working with may have some old ones that are still existing and still working. Okay, so that's why we still include that. But having a mix of triggers, record triggered flows, and process builder is a recipe for disaster because it gets very difficult to control the order of execution. So which one's going to run first? And is the Apex trigger going to trigger the process builder to run again? And then is the process builder going to then trigger the Apex trigger to fire off again? And are we going to end up in some sort of a loop there? Okay, so don't do that. If you've got Apex developers and heavy workloads, then stick with Apex triggers. If you don't have any developers, then work with record triggered flows. And if you've got a whole bunch of process builders, then you need to be working on migrating those to flow or to Apex triggers. So that's number two. Don't mix and match. Number three is we don't build flows in production. Even though you can, don't do it. Build them in a sandbox. that's connected to your production environment so that you can migrate them to production when they're working. If you're just learning, then spin up your own developer org and build your flows in there, and you can do what you like in there because you're not connected to a production environment. You're not going to do any harm there. Number four, and this is a big one, probably these next two are two that we see most beginners fail in these two. And number four is don't use DML in loops. And I'll explain and demonstrate what I mean by that. And the second part is don't use hard-coded IDs. And again, we'll go through and we'll do a demonstration of what we mean by that. Now, before we do that demo, let's look at this don't use DML in loops in a little bit more detail. What do we mean by that? DML means data manipulation language. So that's the create records, get records, update records, delete records. So you don't use that element of a flow inside a loop. Now, here's an analogy in how you don't use that type of transaction in real life either. Okay, imagine that you go into the supermarket and you want to buy one item. So you travel to the supermarket, you go inside, you go to the shelf where that item is, you select your item, you take it to the checkout, you pay for it, and you leave the store. Okay, so that's your transaction. So when you're doing a single transaction like that, it's very simple. Nothing complicated about it. Where it gets tricky is when you go to the store and you want to buy 10 items. And this is what you don't do is you don't go into the store, go to the shelf, get your first item, take it to the checkout, pay for it, go out to the car and put it in the car. Then go back into the store, get your second item, take it to the checkout, pay for it, take it out to the car, come back, continuing until you've got all your 10 items. Why don't we do that? Well, besides the fact that it wastes a lot of our time because we have to travel into the shop and out of the shop again. We have to queue up and wait at the checkout, wait our turn each time. So we're wasting our time. You're going to have 10 credit card transactions. So that might cost more than doing it all in one. And what do you think your bank's going to think about 10 transactions on your card in the one store within a matter of minutes? They could think that that's suspicious and they could block your card. You also might have a security guard in the store who's watching and seeing, hey, this person's come in here 5 times. They pick up one item, they go to the checkout, they check it out, they pay for it, and they go out to the car and they come back in again. That's very suspicious behavior. Kind of like governor limits, isn't it, in Salesforce? And the other problem that you're going to have too is you're probably going to upset other customers in the store because you're going to be queuing up all the time and slowing them down and wasting their time. Okay, so that is very, very similar to all of the reasons why we don't do that in Salesforce, because we don't want to adversely impact other customers by doing some behavior that doesn't make sense. We don't want to waste our resources, which is our time and our money, our extra charges on our credit card. And we don't want that security guard to come chasing us, querying us what we're doing. Okay, so all very similar to those sorts of things that happen in governor limits, and the reason why we don't do that in a loop and we do what's called a bulkify process. And I'll demonstrate that one in just a minute. Now, the last one is don't use hard-coded IDs. And this, I'll give an example of two of them. One is the user ID. Okay, so we don't want to hard code the user ID of the user who is currently running the flow, for example. We also don't want to hard code the ID of a record type. Now, why don't we want to hard code these? Is because between a sandbox and a test environment and production, those IDs can change. So the user ID that I might have in a test environment is going to be a different ID to what I've got in production. The ID of a record type in test can be different to that in production as well. And if we want to be able to easily migrate our flow from one environment to the next, you don't want to have to be editing the record type each time that you deploy it between tests and maybe your user acceptance testing environment. And then again, when you get to production, you don't want to have to change that. Okay, so we need a smarter way of doing that. Okay, so let's have a look at these two, the DMLN loops and the hard-coded IDs, and let's see how we work around that. Okay, so let's have a look at a flow. Okay, so this flow, I might run this one at first actually, so that you can see what it does, and then you'll have a better understanding. Let's just take a couple of seconds while it loads. Okay, it looks a little bit complicated, but it's not. It's fairly simple. We'll just do a quick skim through the process and then I'll run it and then we'll come back and dig into a bit more detail. So I'm going to get my opportunity records. I'm going to display them, allow the user to enter a new close date, and then I'm going to assign some values in here. And then outside the loop here, I'm going to do some updates. Okay, so let's have a quick run and see how it looks. So the opportunities that I'm displaying are just those that are not closed. So you can see that they're at proposition, negotiation stages, etc. And I can select multiple. So I'm going to select these 5 here. So monthly renewal number 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to select those. You can see that they got close dates of March 2021, so we're way past that. And what we're doing in this flow is we're going to set the new close date for all 5 of them all at once. Okay, so we select the 5, we go next and select a new close date, and we'll make that the 1st of March 24. We go next, and okay, that's been done. And if I actually, these are sorted by close date. So we've now gone back to the start and we've gone back and reloaded all the opportunities again. Okay, so we've basically done a refresh. So those ones that we just changed, because we're in closed date order, are going to be right down the end here in March. Where are we? 23. Here we are, March the 1st. 2024. So here we are. Here's our monthly renewal 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there they are. You can see that the dates have closed. Okay, so that's all the flow does. So let's dig in and have a look and see what we're doing here. So we're doing a get records and we're getting our opportunity. Now here's where we talked about not hard coding user IDs. And we want my opportunities. So to get my opportunities, we need to filter them by owner. And we can use, there's a Salesforce Flow global variable here that we can use. I'll just remove it and we can just put it back in again. So below the variables that you might have already created, down the bottom here, is a set of global variables. And there's one here called user. And we can get the values from the current user who's running this flow. So we can get the country, we could get the country code, their email address, etc. But what we want here is we want the ID. So that's where instead of pasting in there a user ID value, we're getting that from that global value. Okay, and we're now saying, so that's going to get my opportunities, but I want to make sure that they're not closed won and they're not closed lost. So I've added those two criteria in as well. And then I sort them by close date, getting all the records. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. That gets our opportunity records. I've then got a screen to display them, and it's got a little table here that will display those, and that comes from that get opportunities. So that's our source. So the records that will be displayed in that table come from there. Now, it could be that we get an error, and here's another best practice. You might not have access to get records. Okay, so there might be for get opportunity records. So there could be an error occur when you run this flow as an end user and you go to get opportunity records. There might be some that for whatever reasons you can't get them. If that's the case, then we've got a fault here, and the fault displays a screen because this is a screen-based flow, so we can do a pop-up screen. And it will display, say, hey, there was an error getting these opportunities, and we can pass across some values from the flow. So the actual message, the record, the date, the time, and the user name in there as well. Okay, all coming from that dollar user or that dollar flow from those global variables. Okay, so if we don't get an error, we'll display them in that table. And then we just got a new entry screen for that close date. And I've just put that in a section and just made a small one in the middle of 2 columns width. 2 out of 12 and made the other 2. That was just so that we don't end up with a date column that's a full page width. That's all. Now we get to our loop. Okay. Now within the loop, all we're doing is assigning values. Okay. And the important thing here is that the update and the create records is out here afterwards. Okay, so what are we doing inside the loop? Firstly, what are we looping? We're looping through a collection variable. So we're looping through a collection of records. So this is like when you've got to the shop counter with a basket full of goodies, the ones that you have selected off the shelf. Instead of doing them one at a time, you've brought your basket along this time. And we're now going to process that basket. Okay, so this is from that table, we had the checkboxes, and when we selected 5 of them, those 5 get added to this selected rows. Okay, so we've got a collection from that table of the selected rows. And we're going to go through one of those at a time, from the first to the last. And what we're going to do in here is we'll just open this up. Okay, so now we've got an assignment, and we've got 2 parts to the assignment because we're doing 2 things at once. The first thing that we're doing is we're assigning the ID, the opportunity ID, because we want to update these opportunities with their new close dates. Okay, to do that, we need the opportunity ID and we need the new close date. So the opportunity ID first, we get that from that loop, opportunity ID from within there, and we assign that to the opportunity ID field in a temporary variable that we've set up called R opportunity. I'll cover that in a minute. And then we put our new close date, which we got from this screen here. We take that new close date and we add that to the close date on our record for opportunity as well. Now this opportunity variable, let's just have a quick look and see what that looks like. Here it is here. It is a single record variable to store an opportunity record. Okay. My naming convention is R for record underscore opportunity. It's really simple. It is a record to store an opportunity. Simple as that. And you can see that data type is a record. Object is an opportunity. I've not ticked the allow multiple, so it's not a collection. It is just one record. Okay, so we're populating one record with the ID of an opportunity and then a new close date. Then we're taking that one record and we're adding it to our record collection of opportunities. So that's this one here. This one is a collection of opportunity records, and I've prefixed it with RC, a record collection for opportunities, plural. Okay, so it's a record of opportunity, and I allow multiples. Okay, so this is our basket with a whole bunch of opportunities in it. So as I go through the loop, the first record, I'm getting the ID of the current opportunity, getting that new close date from the screen, adding those to that single record, and then saying, okay, take that single record now that's got those two new fields in it and put it in our basket of opportunities. Step one. Step two, I'm also going to create a task each time the opportunity close date is changed through this flow. Okay. Now this task record has a variable as well. It's got a pair, exactly the same as opportunity had. Has one for a single record, has another one for a collection of tasks. Okay, so in the single record, to create, because we're going to be creating a new task, and that's down here. Okay, we're not there yet. But to create a new task, we've got quite a few more fields that we need to populate. We need to populate a due date, a completed date time, priority, status, subject, related to ID. So that will be the ID of the opportunity. So we can relate this task to that opportunity. And a description. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fields that we're going to populate. So we populate all of these for this single task. So they all set to equal something, current date, whatever it is. And then at the end, when all 7 of those are populated, we then say, okay, take that entire record, that single record for task, and add it to our basket of tasks. Okay, so now we've got in our collection of tasks, we've got one task. In our collection of opportunities, we've got one opportunity. And then we go back and we loop through again and we do 2, 3, 4, and 5. Remember, there was 5 in this one that we did when we demonstrated it. Okay, so that's what's happening inside the loop. Now, outside the loop, we're setting a counter. Now, just before we do that, let's have a look down here. And so one of the other best practices, and I haven't mentioned it yet, is that we do is have meaningful variable names. So hopefully you can understand my meaning there. And we've got another one here called count selected opportunities, count selected ops. Okay, it's just a count of the opportunities that we selected. Okay, so we counted 5 of them. We ticked 5 of them to update. So that's where this variable is going to be used. And it's done here in an assignment. Reason being, we might not have selected any. And if there was none selected, then we go over here to the right, we go to none. End of flow. So we set that counter and we say that counter equals the count of how many records are in our basket full of opportunities. And there should be 5 in the example that we did. Okay, so we've got 5. So we say, okay, yes, we're going to go down this side. We're going to update our opportunities. Something went wrong. Good on you. Just what we don't need in the middle of a demo. This page has an error. Okay. Let's try a refresh as it says, because we haven't changed anything. Okay, here we're back again. Okay, so we were here and we were trying to update. Okay. So what are we doing? We're updating our opportunities first. So we're using the IDs and all the field values from a record collection. Okay, and we have our record collection of opportunities. So this is our basket full of opportunities, and there's a whole bunch of records in there. In fact, there's 5 in there when we ran it before. That has simply opportunity ID and the new date. So there's 5 records, and those are the only 2 fields that are filled in. And for an update records, that's all we need. We need the ID of the record we want to update, and we need to set the fields that we want to update. So that one's pretty straightforward. And if we have a fault, again, we've got a fault screen that will display an error. The next one is create the tasks. So kind of similar to the previous one, the update, but in this case, we are creating records and we'll be doing multiple tasks, creating multiple from our collection of tasks. So we had a basket of tasks. So we kind of went through the checkout with 2 baskets. One had opportunity, one had tasks. Okay, so this is the tasks one. Now, a little bit different here in that if our opportunities were updated okay, well, that's great. And we proceeded to then do our tasks. But if we had a problem with the tasks, what we want to do is we want to roll back the records, because if the opportunities are updated but there's no task to indicate that message, then we've got a problem and we really don't want to update the opportunity. So we're going to do a rollback records, okay, which is going to roll back to our last screen. So it's going to roll back all the way back to here. Okay, so it's going to undo the creation of those update of those opportunities, and it's going to roll us all the way back. And it's also going to display this fault screen as well. Okay, so it's if that task creation failed for some reason, and it could be that we don't have permission to create tasks, whatever reason, then the creation of those tasks will not occur, and the update of those tasks, of those opportunities, will be rolled back as well. Okay, let's just go back to our presentation because we've covered a whole lot of stuff in there, and let's just see what we have looked at. Okay, so we said don't use DML and loops, and we've demonstrated what we meant by that. In other words, if you're buying 10 things at the shop, don't go in and out of the shop and through the checkout 10 times. Use your basket, add them to the basket, and then do your transaction, which is your update records or whatever it is that you're doing. It could be a delete records or could be a create records. Do it in one step. Okay, so do it with your collection of all of the records that you've got to do. Don't use hard-coded ID. Oh, okay, so we haven't demonstrated this one yet. So we've got another flow that's going to use a record type, and I'll show you how to do that one. Let's have a look at that quickly. Okay, so we'll close that one, and we've got another, we can close that screen as well, and we've got another flow here called accounts display retail record types. Okay, so what I've done here is on the account object, I've created some record types, and we've got 2. We've got retail accounts and we've got corporate accounts. Now, only some of the accounts have been changed to the record types. But as you can see for retail, we've got 7. Okay, we've got 7 retail accounts record types. We've got another 4 or 5 corporate, and then there's a whole bunch of other ones that don't have any record types yet. Okay, so in this flow, what we're going to do is just display the retail record types. We don't actually do anything with them. We're just simply doing a display. And the best practice that we're looking at here is how do we do a get records for a record type? Well, it's actually pretty simple. We do a get records on the record type. Okay, so the object is record type. So there's actually an object in Salesforce called record type, and that's where it stores the IDs of our record types. Perfect. So we just do a get records, and we only need to get one. But there's two things we need to set. Firstly, we need to set the name, and you can use that name or you can use the developer name, okay, which is also the API name. You can use either one. Okay, name's probably easy because you can use the full, text value. You don't have to worry about whether it has an underscore or not. It's nice and simple. So you need to set that. And you also need to set the object type, okay, just in case there is a thing called retail account on some other object, which is possible. If it was just called retail, maybe you've got accounts called retail and you've got contacts called retail as well. So I just set the two of those. So set the name, set the object type. We don't need to sort them. There's only one, and we only want to get the first one and just automatically store the fields. That's all we need to do. Okay, so it's just a very simple get record, and that gets us the ID of the record type. Solves the problem of when we move to production, doesn't matter. It will go and get the record ID from the record type for us. Then we can go ahead now and we can get our records. So now we're going to get our records where the record ID equals the value that came back from that previous get records, okay, which is that record type. As you can just see when I hover over there, is the record type ID. Okay, and in this case, I'm going to get all the records and automatically store them. I could have done some additional filtering, but all we're really interested in at the moment is just making sure that we just get the record type that we want. And then the next step is to display them. So I just use a simple table here. Thank you. And the source of the records that are going to go in here is from that get records on the accounts. Okay, so that's what's going to display there. And if we run that in debug mode, we can see what happens. So first thing is we want to make sure that this first get records works. So find all record types where name equals retail account and the object type equals account. Store the result in there. Okay, and we successfully found records. Good. Because if you get that name of that record type wrong, you'll get an error here. And then in the next step in your table, you'll see all the records. So they won't be filtered by record type, and that's not what we want. And that happened to me before, but I just didn't have the name exactly right. I just had retail, not retail account. I couldn't work out why I was getting them all. Okay, so now we then use that record type ID as part of our filtering here to get our records. So now you can see that we've got 7 records. Okay, showing 7 records. And we go back to all accounts, you can see that we have 7 retail accounts. Okay, so there are all the don'ts. So don't use Flow for everything. Don't mix them. Don't build in production. Don't use DML in loops. Don't hard code the IDs. Do these things. Okay. So here's the good things that you should do. Do plan before you start building. Okay, so before you start building a flow, start with the user story. What is it that you're trying to achieve? You want to display just the accounts that are of retail account record type. Okay. But there's something that you have to do first. You have to get that ID of that record type. How are you going to do that? Well, if you don't know how to do that yet, you're going to have to find out. So you can't start building it before you've got all of those components of the story right. Next thing is use descriptions on everything. Everywhere where there's a description box, put something in there. Use descriptive names. Use good flow naming conventions and descriptions. Okay, let's just go back to that flow and just have a quick look at it again and see whether or not we've done that. Which one have we got? Okay, the other one's probably a better example. Let's just close that. Don't think we actually changed anything there. We'll go back to the other one because it's got some additional variables. This one, the close date on the opportunity. Okay. Okay, so we're talking about the naming conventions. So you don't have to follow my naming convention. Make up your own. Feel free to make up your own, but make it simple. If you have to spend more than a couple of minutes explaining to your colleague what the naming convention is, then you've got it wrong. You've got a bad convention. I could explain to you very simply what mine is. If it's a single record, it'll be R underscore the object name, R opportunity. It's a single record that stores an opportunity. Kind of makes sense. And look, if you look here, record single variable, R opportunity. Kind of makes sense, doesn't it? Record collection, RC opportunities. It's a collection of opportunity records. Same with tasks. What's this one? Count selected ops. It's a count of how many opportunities we've selected. Nice and easy to understand. Flow naming convention. Opportunity. So they'll all be alphabetically listed together, all the ones that deal with opportunities. And then what does it do? It changes the close date. Kind of makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense to you. When you save the flow, add a description in here. I should add some more to there. That's better. Allows the end user to bulk change the close date for selected opportunities, includes a fault path. Okay. End users are not going to see this description, but your next developer or your next admin who comes along to look at your flow is going to see that. So that's why it is important. And it also displays on the list of flows here. Somewhere. I might not have the field. I might not have the that field displayed. Pretty sure there is a description field. Yeah, flow description. There it is. I just didn't have it displayed. Okay, so there is the flow description. So most of those I've been pretty good. I didn't create all of these flows, so some of these are not mine. So that's why maybe some of them don't have a description. So I'm not going to take responsibility for all of them. So good descriptions on everything, good descriptive names for your variables, good flow naming conventions, plus descriptions on them. Okay, if we're using a record triggered flow, okay, which is a flow that runs when a record changes or is created or deleted, if possible, and it's not always possible, but if it's possible, make it a before save flow because it will run 10 times faster. Now, that's not always possible. If you want to perform actions on related records, then it's not possible and it'll have to be an after save flow. Okay. Basically, a before save flow, the performance is almost the same as an Apex trigger, right? It's about 5%. Apex is about 5% faster. Okay, so a before save flow can actually be pretty quick. Okay, most of the other ones we've pretty much covered, but let's just make sure. We didn't mention this one, but using subflows is helpful to reduce complexity and allow the reuse of common code. So, if, for example, you have a function in your flow, maybe a screen flow, that calculates, for example, the freight cost for a product. Okay, so if you're got like a shopping cart sort of application and the customer's adding some products and when you want to work out what the freight cost might be, then it would make sense to have a separate bit of code that just does that in a subflow, and you could pass it the product ID and the number of products, and then it could, and perhaps the delivery address, and then it could return the cost of freight for that particular item or for a number of items. Okay, so it would make sense that you could separate that bit of code out and use a subflow for that because there might be a number of different places where you could use that. Do use fault paths to handle errors. Okay, and I've demonstrated that on a few occasions. Pretty much every time you've got a pink element in your flow, you should have a fault path. Okay, so here on the get records, it might seem obvious, but it may well be that the user that's running the flow just simply doesn't have access to opportunities. Maybe they're on a restricted license, or there might be any number of reasons why they don't have access to get any opportunity records. More importantly, on update and create records, okay, that you definitely have a fault path. Do you use the latest API version? Now let's just have a quick look at that. Because what tends to happen is over time, um, now this flow was created a couple of versions back, and the reason why I know is because when I go to save as, down here on advanced, if you scroll, there's how to run the flow, and this is where you can run it as like in system admin mode if you want to. But the important one down here is the API version of running the flow. So you can see this was API version 58. We're now at version 60, which I think is what are we up to? Some more spring, I think. Okay, so you can change it to the newest version simply by selecting that and going save and activating that, and now you've got a flow in the very latest version, which might mean that there are some additional features of flow that you can now access that you couldn't before because you've now just jumped to versions. Don't forget to activate it as well. Okay, so there've been progressively a few changes, for example, on the table. I think the table now has an option where you can do a search within it. Okay, it might not have been available in that earlier version. Okay, I'm just conscious of time. Do test your flows thoroughly, and that's why we have sandboxes. That's what they're for. Sandboxes and UAT environments, etc., to move across to test them thoroughly before they get to production. In the same way that you might write test classes for Apex, you can now write tests within flows. We don't have time to go through that today, but there is a utility within Flow where you can actually build tests now and be able to rerun those in the future as well. Okay, a couple of last things. Do analyze and then migrate your workflows to process build and process builder to Flow. that should say workflows and process builder to flows. Okay, so have a good look at them first before you migrate. Do you really need them? Are they still relevant today? Before you migrate them from process builder to flows, particularly if you're using the tool that you can migrate process builder to flow, just make sure that you really do need to, and analyze them properly, because you might be able to take a number of process builders and combine them into one flow. And there are things that you can do in flow that you couldn't do in process builder. So there are better ways of doing the automations. Do ask the community for help. So does every social media has a forum or a group of some sort where you can ask for help around flow and flow best practice? Obviously, the Trailblazer community groups are a good place to start. Do check unofficialsf.com for some great flow utilities. Now, if you look at that data table, the standard basic data table in Salesforce is lacking some really important features, like being able to sort on columns, being able to edit within the data table. Now, there is a utility, a data table utility on unofficialsf.com that has all of those features, okay, that you can use. And then finally, there is a tool called Flow Analyzer in the App Exchange. Now, let's have a quick look at this, and let's run the Flow Analyzer against not this flow, because I know this one's good, but the other one, because there's a problem with the other one. Okay, so the Flow Analyzer is a tool that you can find on the App Exchange. It's free. And what it does is analyzes your flow for you. So you basically install it, come here, go to configuration, click the button, and away you go. And it's configured. And then you go to the next step, and it says, okay, select an org. So I'm going to select this one. I've only got one. And then we're now going to filter the flows. Okay, so we're going to get a list of flows back. So we're going to say label contains, and the one that I want is this one, accounts display retail record types. Okay, so it's got, where are we, Flow Analyzer. So it's got the word accounts in it without the I. Okay, so now we can get flow. So this is just firing that up so that we can get the ones that we want. And here's the list. Okay, accounts, display, retail record types. All right, so we want to analyze this one. We could select them all, but we're just going to run one. Okay, so analysis has begun. Okay, and you'll get an email when it's done. And you can go here to analyzer runs and see what's happened. Okay, so it's already run. It's pretty quick. And it's created this record here. You can see it's run. It analysed one flow, and it's got a score of 2. Okay, there were 2 violations. Okay, so let's dig in and have a look and see what went wrong. Okay, so just some bare sort of details about the actual record, but the important bit's over here. So this was the name of the flow, and if we click here, we can see what the problem was. Missing or empty fault path, 2 violations. Let's go back and have a look and see what we're talking about. Display retail record types. Missing fault paths. It said there were 2 of them. And it's right. Look, there is no fault path. How do we add a fault path? We go right there and we go add fault path. And because this is a screen flow, we can add a display screen message there. Okay, and likewise, we could go here and we could add another fault path, and we could save this and go back and analyze again, and of course we wouldn't get that error. Okay, if we like to go back to the analyzer, because we've got a couple of minutes left, let's go back to this org and we'll scan the other one. So the label of the other one was called opportunity change close date. Okay. No, label contains opportunity. Get our list of flows. Make sure we get the right one here. Opportunity change close date number 2, that one. And let's run that one. Okay, the analysis has begun. And it's finished, and we've got no violations. That's nice. 0 violations for a total score of 0. Okay, so there was nothing wrong with it. It was perfect. Okay, so that's the flow analyzer. So quite a neat little tool. Now, there's no reason to do an individual one at a time there. You could select a whole bunch of them and analyze them and then go through and have a look and see what's wrong. And those rules, you can enable them. If we select all, here is what those rules are. So things like hard-coded IDs, look, it's looking for those. Nested loop, old API version, unused variables, DML between screens, hard-coded IDs again, missing or empty fault paths, nested loops. Okay, so here are those rules, and you can decide whether or not you want to keep those, and you can also decide how many points you want to assign to one of those rules. So you can see that I've changed this one. I've said, look, this missing or empty fault path is a really important one, and I've put 2 points against that. So if somebody has a flow and they're missing the fault path, then they're going to get a high penalty score on that one. Okay, so there's our do's and don'ts. Feel free to go back to the recording of this session if you want to do a bit of a brush up. But look, certainly the key things around these don'ts, if you don't use DML and loops, don't hard code IDs, right? And of course, don't build your flows in a production, then you're in a good place. And then, of course, don't assume that flow's the answer for everything, and don't mix up your triggers and your flows. And then on the do's, do put descriptions on everything and use good naming conventions and so on. Because you'll thank yourself when you come back and have a look at a flow in 6 months' time. Those descriptions on all of your variables and the good names that you've used will really pay back and save you a lot of time. Subflows for reducing complexity are really helpful. Do use your flow paths. Keep up to date with the latest API version. So when there is a new release come out and you've tested your flows and you know that they're working okay in the new version, save as and up that API version. Don't let that get too far behind. And of course, Flow Analyzer will help identify that for you too. As you could see, there was an option in there for the old API version, so it will actually point that out to you and let you know. And look, keep an eye out on unofficialsf.com, and within there is a section on flow, because there is some great stuff in there, and I've used the data table, and there is another utility in there that I've used a couple of times too, and that was to be able to take a CSV file and convert that into records, and that was really helpful utility that I got from there as well. Okay, so just looking at the chat, John Peter, do we have any questions or any feedback?
There is no question. Thanks for the informative session.
No questions? Okay. Good. All right. Well, I think we can finish up then. Thank you, everybody, for your attention, and hello to those who are watching or listening the recorded version. And sorry you couldn't be with us today, but hopefully that you'll enjoy some best practice from Flow there, and hopefully we can see that you're doing all the do's and not doing all the don'ts. And good luck with your building flows. Thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for giving time. Thanks for the informative session. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Bye.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.